Welcome back. Breakfast Central on News Central right here. It's a Monday and we're still kicking with it today on the show. So let's go straight to more impact stories. And all about U.S. suspension on Malawi tobacco and its imports. Now, we're talking about this because the suspension on Malawi and its tobacco imports from the U.S. government suspended all imports from Malawi over child labor allegations. Now, the ban follows the news that human rights lawyers are to bring a case against British American Tobacco in the High Courts in London over child labor in Malawi's tobacco fields. Now, as a result of these revelations by a UK newspaper on the scale of the abuse last year, now the lawyers are acting for nearly 2,000 claimants, mostly children and the parents, with an expected 15,000 people meant to join the case. Now, the US Customs and Border Protection had 2 weeks ago issued a withhold release order on tobacco from Malawi, meaning shipments arriving in the United States will be detained on the port of entry, and imports will then have to prove the tobacco is not produced with labor prohibited under US law to have the shipments released. Now, experts now believe that the new regulation will force companies to engage with the issue on the ground in Malawi. Also, tobacco cultivation in one of Malawi's traditional economic activities, and it is still the most important cash crop in the country of Malawi. It accounts for over 13% of Malawi's gross domestic product, and Bele tobacco is the main variety with a share of over 80% of total production. Now, joining me to really break down all of this is the editor-in-chief of Ripples Nigeria, Samuel Ibemere. Welcome, Samuel. Good morning, Breakfast Central.
My pleasure to be here.
Big sanctions now for Malawian tobacco. It looks like it was one of the most sought-after brand there. But how much of an impact will this be on the Malawian economy, especially when it comes to their exports?
Yeah, a lot of impact, one would say. But I think that we need to put this in proper perspective. I wasn't totally surprised.
Why so?
Because way back, as far as 1930s, the US, had prohibited goods, especially that are supposed to have been,
gotten through.
Yeah, gotten through forced or child labor.
Child labor.
So for Malawi, it's going to have a huge impact because Malawi as a country is responsible for almost 7%, in fact 6.6% of total tobacco exports
across the globe.
Across the globe. That's quite huge. So one can imagine the impact of that on the economy. If the US shuts down your imports, just US, one of the biggest importers, then you can imagine what will happen to other trade partners, across the globe. In fact, this season alone, the country has earned over $200 million. Now, if you put a stop to all that, it does mean that revenue will shrink. And of course, for most African countries, where you have a monocultural economy, once that is turned off, the economy goes into some sort of coma. Tobacco is quite huge. It's one of Malawi's greatest foreign exchange earner. In fact, it's put at almost 50%. Okay. In 2017 alone, the stats indicate that Malawi earned over half $500 million. So the impact is going to be massive, and but again, beyond sentiments, businesses have to do what is right. Corporate governance is important. You don't want to put kids, below 18 through a lot of danger because you want to earn money. So I think that what we're talking about here is global best practices. You don't want to risk anyone's life because you want to make money.
We know that this ban comes as a result of human rights lawyers, because there's a case against British American Tobacco, B8, which is one of the big clubbers in this tobacco industry. They're going to be taking the case to the High Court in London over child labor in the Malawian tobacco fields itself. So it's not just the Malawian government that are being called to question. It's the businesses themselves, the BATs of this world and the other tobacco exporting production companies. Where's Malawi? Who are now receiving the slap from a fellow US, from a Western, Western sanctioning authority, if I had to use that kind of language.
Well, it's understandable. I mean, these companies are not operating in isolation. It's a partnership. I mean, if the Malawian government didn't provide the environment for them to do business, they wouldn't be doing business in the first place in Malawi. So
are we saying
Malawi
the Malawian government has allowed this child labor to thrive?
Yes, and I'm going to try to explain that.
Who's supposed to take responsibility? What about the big businesses themselves, the BATs of this world?
Beyond the big businesses, you have to talk about Malawi. And the reason we have to do that is because you need to have the right laws in place to protect the kids. From what I have gathered, the Malawian Act, on child labor of 2000 puts the minimum wage, the minimum age at which, a young person could be admitted to employment at 14.
Okay.
At 14, that is quite low. And then between 14 and 18 years, the only guarantees that you have, or the protection that the child has, is that he or she wouldn't be allowed into a hazardous environment. But again, who defines what is hazardous? Remember that.
And who defines which one is child labor? Because for Malawi, 14 years old is not necessarily child labor, but that might be seen
like a baby. And then you place that in the context of the poverty level. At 14, most kids are still very young, probably out of primary school. And then because families are challenged, kids are forced to go out there and help to earn, trying to help earn a living for the family. So we need to appreciate the fact that the government has an important role to play by way of legislation. Now, if you don't have the right legislation, people just take advantage of the environment. Yes, I have concerns too about the way big businesses do things. The BATs of the world and the rest of them. But BAT
it looks like they are fine with it as long as its production is coming.
Absolutely. For them is the bottom line. But to be fair to the BATs of this world, they've denied that they don't have, they're not actively involved in encouraging child labor. They've denied it. Okay. But what is important is that cases of this nature need to be properly investigated. You really can't rule out anything. We need to take our minds back to what happened in Ghana not too long ago about, I think that had to do with cocoa and the rest of them. And when investigations were conducted, it was confirmed that these big corporations had been involved or had encouraged child labor. So we can't completely rule out the BATs of this world and big businesses, in terms of their involvement in encouraging child labor. Sometimes they push the profit motive, too far in the scheme of things without caring how much damage is done to Africa's young children.
Yeah, right. We're talking about the very bare where the tobacco production starts, which is the tobacco plantation fields in Malawi. Accusations of child labor, Malawi being slapped by US sanctions, and big businesses being taken to court in London. All right, let's talk about Malawi first of all. It's a country where, especially when it comes to these tobacco plantation fields, this is generational. We're talking about families who own these fields and children who are born into these families who have to go into, the plantation as early. Like you said, the Malawi, when it comes to labor laws there, at the age of 14, you can work, whether it's on the plantation
or elsewhere.
This labor is not forced labor, is it? We're talking about here. The US can call it child labor, but in Malawian terms, it's not forced labor. It's not even child labor. It's children.
Normal duty.
It's
normal
just
work.
labor.
Something you do to earn a living.
Yeah. We don't want to go into the talk about exploitation, but this is normalcy in those regions.
Yeah, like you did say, the Malawian economy is based principally on agriculture. And over the years, tobacco has been the mainstay of the economy. And like I did point out, over 50% of Malawian income, foreign exchange earnings, come from tobacco exports. And for a country that is responsible for almost 7% of total global exports
of tobacco.
That's massive. I think that the reason why the child labor issue, has taken, front burner is the fact that within the Malawian, environment, a lot of poverty.
Okay.
And so kids from that early, stage in their life are forced to be part of, the business activities to help.
Yeah, as a result of the situations they find themselves.
To help, augment income. But the dilemma we face here, is that why the law says at 14, you can make a move and begin to work and earn an income. The US and some other societies in the West or the so-called developed world are saying that once you are below 18 and you're working, that places you
on that breach of child labor laws.
The other child labor watch. And I think that there has to be some understanding here, because we need to balance between these laws and the challenge of getting these economies, not stifling these economies because of what is perceived as a shortcoming in terms of maybe corporate governance, issues.
Where do you see this going right now? Where do you see this going? Because the sanctions are still there. The labor continues in Malawi. There's some big businesses that are being dragged to court in London. Where do we go from here?
I think it's going to be resolved. There's been a response on the part of the Malawian government. The stakeholders have called for a meeting. I think that was done a couple of days back. And the issues raised, I believe are going to be addressed, at the meeting. But the fact still remains that in spite of these denials, there are clear, indications that child labor tribes,
exist.
In Malawi. In fact, a 2017 survey that I read up, before this program, says that almost 40%, in fact, specifically about 38% of Malawian children are still, exposed to, child labor issues. And that's massive.
That's something to think about.
Yeah, that's quite massive. So at some point, something has to give.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Samuel Ibemere, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Editor, Ripples Nigeria. We'll really love to have you more, especially when it comes to issues within the media.